Thanks very much. Let's shift focus because we are in times that seem to be showing us a ray of hope after a conflict in Ukraine that has gone on for months, that have turned into years. Is there a possibility of an equitable ceasefire agreement that leads to a lasting peace? It's a loaded question because not only emotions, passions, and life and death have been at stake, but grand geopolitics in what is already a new Cold War have to play themselves out as well. Joining us on the broadcast to discuss this further is Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, Gilbert Doctor, and Professor Madhav Nalapat will also be joining us shortly. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin with you. What is your assessment of what is taking place in the conversations in Saudi Arabia, sir?
Well, I think the United States is trying to put immediate pressure on Russia to positively respond to the so-called agreement with Zelenskyy or Ukraine to accept a 30-day ceasefire. Now, if you see, the narrative is that the ball is in Putin's court or Russia's court. Now, Putin yesterday has in his press conference with Lukashenko spelled out what the concerns of Russia are. And if you have heard that, I think what he has said makes sense, and it is very legitimate that the ceasefire cannot just be declared unless it is embedded in a proper discussion on what happens on the ground and what precautions and measures are going to be taken to ensure a proper implementation of the ceasefire. Now, as you know, the ceasefire proposal has come at a moment when Zelenskyy has lost virtually his trump card in Kursk. He was all this time saying that this will give him a card to play in negotiations in terms of exchanging territory with Russia, where Russia gives him whatever he seeks in the regions which have been annexed by Russia and in return for a withdrawal from Kursk. But that card has been lost. And there is now a danger that Russia may actually go beyond the Kursk and actually try to create a buffer zone in the future. So there is need for an immediate ceasefire so far as Zelenskyy is concerned. But there are other issues which are very, very important from the Russian point of view, purely logically. The Europeans have made it very clear that they are going to support Ukraine to the hilt. They will give him all the arms and aid that he needs. They have joined together in various ways. They've held a meeting of the 34 chiefs of staff of NATO to do brainstorming on how to support Ukraine. The European Union has talked about $850 billion to be spent over the next few years by the European Union to rearm themselves. And I heard the British Prime Minister say yesterday on television, which seemed a little odd, that Russia is threatening UK in land, water, and air, and in the streets of the UK. Now, this narrative is being spread that if Ukraine if Russia wins in Ukraine, then the future security of the European Union is threatened. Now, European Union and the United States are working at cross purposes. And Russia cannot ignore what is happening on the ground in terms of what the Europeans are doing. So they have to have a lot of clarity in terms of a future peace process. And that's where the matters are. I think it's going to be a very difficult process, as the gap in the position of the two sides is very wide. And questions Russia is raising.
So Ambassador Sibal, so the Trump administration wants the ceasefire to happen. They are not mincing words upon it. They are saying there has to be a ceasefire. Russia says we are cautiously optimistic, but we don't want the Ukrainians simply to use the ceasefire to rearm. The Europeans, how much of it is rhetoric, gamesmanship, or do you actually think that Europe is going to take a different position to the Americans fundamentally?
For the time being, yes. Now, what the credibility of this is a matter of judgment. There are people who say that at the end of the day, Europe has been used to U.S. security cover, and its defenses have been relatively neglected. And to rebuild them in any relevant time frame to the Ukraine conflict is not on the cards. You can't set up a huge defense industry overnight. It'll take years. And on top of that, who will then lead Europe in terms of defense? Will it be van der Leyen in Brussels? Will it be France? Because President Macron has been extremely active in this regard. So there are a lot of divisions within Europe. Do they have a joint armed forces? Do they have a joint command? Who will then actually man the various commands? So these are, the point is that the Europeans are putting a lot of pressure on the United States and putting a spanner in the works as much as they can, so that the entente between USA and Russia under Trump can be delayed. The Europeans, from a certain point of view, are not wrong. That look, it's a question of peace in Europe, and you cannot then decide on peace in Europe without involving the Europeans. But what the Americans are saying is, well, for 3 years you were involved in this, and what has come of it? You've not been able to solve it. So why at this stage want to come into the process?
After all that has been...
One important last thing.
Yes.
That the Europeans are determined to send their peacekeepers. French and the British have agreed to that on the ground after a peace solution of sorts. Russia has categorically rejected that time and again. This is going to be a big issue in the future.
Can Vladimir Zelenskyy sit on a table with Putin or his representative? Is that possible, sir? Or does a ceasefire or eventual peace deal in a sense mean that there has to be a change of guard in Ukraine?
Two things. One, Zelenskyy passed a decree that there cannot be any negotiations with Russia so long as Putin is in charge. Putin, in turn, has said that Zelenskyy is illegitimate, and the power now lies with the Ukrainian parliament. And therefore, there should be a re-election election in Ukraine to decide on who would be, which would be the legitimate government. Now, Ukraine, despite all the peace talks, has not undone this decree. If Zelenskyy was to undo the decree, it would be a huge political setback for him domestically. So he's not going to do that. So there are a lot of weaknesses in the situation with regard to the legality of the peace process, because Putin has said that don't be in a situation where I sign an agreement with a government which is not legitimate, and a subsequent government may actually take this as a reason for not honoring the agreement.
Okay.
So there are lots of difficulties ahead of all sorts. So I can't see Zelenskyy sitting personally together with the Russians.
Okay. As you're well aware, sir, Vladimir Putin has specifically mentioned Prime Minister Modi while talking about a potential ceasefire. What role can India still play other than that of a well-wisher?
In which he made this statement, he didn't want to give credit only to Trump to try and broker some kind of peace in Ukraine. He said that other leaders of other countries have also spent a lot of their time in trying to address this issue. And he mentioned our Prime Minister, he mentioned Xi Jinping, he mentioned Lula, and he mentioned South Africa. But there is a nuance here, if you want to read it that way, that if and when the issue of peacekeepers has to be decided, Russia would be totally against the idea of European peacekeepers. But these countries, if they so choose, they can actually be part of peacekeepers or peace monitors or whatever. I don't think we like the word peacekeepers, because that means you can use violence. But peace monitors on the ground. It is said in that context rather than asking for these countries to mediate. I don't think so that was his intention.
We have, under UN mandate, deployed peace monitors and peacekeepers before, sir. Should it be open for consideration by us if the offer was to come?
Yes, if there's a UN resolution, then we should accept our responsibility. And in fact, both sides would be quite happy if countries like India were on the ground, because we've maintained a neutral stance. We have credibility with both sides. We have actually not been mediating, but we have been passing messages to and fro between President Putin and President Zelenskyy. Our national security advisor actually went all the way to Moscow to brief President Putin on the conversations our Prime Minister had with the President Zelenskyy. So that credibility is there. So our position has always been that it has to be part of a UN-sanctioned peacekeeping move, not in any other format.
Okay, Kanwal Sibal, thank you for joining us with your thoughts. Let me open this up to Professor Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, caution